Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Thompson. I'm the director at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center in both Spring Hill and Lewisburg, Tennessee. I have the opportunity today to share with you part of the beef tour at the Mile and No-Till Field Day. And I'm going to be covering a topic that I think is truly impactful, but one that's often overlooked that can help us build profit potential within our beef cattle operations. And I'll just be briefly discussing how to manage stress and anxiety in us, the handler, and also your beef cattle herd. And it's just going to be a purpose-driven discussion. And I would like to just start off with basically saying I'm going to be talking about how to really understand and recognize stress in ourselves and what that impacts upon the herd. And then in turn, how to reduce that stress so it can make the cattle handling process more enjoyable, not only for yourself, but those folks that are working alongside you. And it also impacts something that is critical to all of us, especially in the agricultural industry. We all understand that this is an industry that really includes the whole family. We might have the 5-year-old granddaughter or grandchild out there working right alongside mother and father, aunt and uncle, grandfather, and even the 90-year-old great-grandfather. And too often in our industry, we hear about injuries and incidents that result from beef cattle causing those injuries to those that are really young and to those that are really old. So understanding the implementation of low stress handling can help prevent those events that are traumatic. Also, it helps us to understand that there is an additive behavior effect in beef cattle. So how do we treat them today, be it positive or negative, is going to affect how they handle for us tomorrow. And it also impacts our attitude and how we look forward to, or just look forward not to participating in gathering our cattle out of the pasture. And also within today's industry, we have so many people that truly are well-intentioned, but they have just been so far removed from agriculture, they really don't understand the ins and outs. So it gives us the opportunity to be positive advocates through our actions. You know, we can spread the word all day long and put things on Facebook and blogs and things of that nature, but people truly understand what actions mean, and how we treat our cattle and how we treat the people around us while we're handling our cattle gives us the opportunity to be a positive advocate for the industry that we enjoy being stewards in, and taking care of the cattle that we have, and help support our operation. Also, I think if we look at it from the standpoint with today's increase in input costs, we have to look at ways of diversifying. Often we think of diversification as raising corn, soybeans, wheat, and then to diversify, we're going to add cotton, or we're going to add some type of fruit production and market. But we can actually diversify our operation within that specific discipline by adding different added value management practices to our beef cattle herd. You know, there's so many things that can increase efficiency and productivity, and then offset costs that are truly unnecessary. But to do that, we really have to gather our cattle and run them through our handling facility so that we can truly manage them. You know, some ways to really increase the overall performance potential is to participate in the 3-month vaccination protocol. When these calves hit 3 months of age, they lose the immunity that's coming from nursing their mother, so that we can start vaccination protocols that help their immune system. And with that, we have increased growth and growth potential, and less likelihood to have deficits in growth because of health events. If we enjoy working our cattle, it makes us more likely to participate in artificial insemination programs, where we can take advantage of some of the best genetics in the country right there at our fingertips at a very economical cost. But sometimes that means gathering our herd, 3 times. So if it's something that we enjoy and the cattle have been patterned to respond to our actions in gathering and processing, and they're not causing us a lot of stress, we're more likely to participate in those programs. Pregnancy testing, we've got to get those cattle up and do that. And that way it gives us the opportunity to go ahead and remove those cows from the herd that are open and just consuming that forage or that hay or that silage and really not producing anything. That makes us more efficient in our operation. Also, it gives us, makes us more likely to participate in a pre-weaning vaccination protocol. So whenever we wean our calves, there's less stress there from potential negative illness effects, so that they adapt quicker, they get on feed quicker, and they start in a positive growth and gaining plane. And then we're also more likely to participate in some preconditioning programs after weaning because our cattle, as young calves still on the cow, have been handled more often. So they're going to handle more easily and readily whenever they're weaned and they're on their own. And there are many other opportunities that we have if we're just willing to handle our cattle and enjoy that process. Critical first step is just managing levels of stress. It's critical that we learn to control our personal level of anxiety, our personal level of stress, our own temper, because it manifests directly into the temperament and actions of the cattle that we're handling. So if we lose our temper, we're going to get quicker with our movements. We're going to get louder with our vocalization. And that's really going to upset the cattle and make them not want to cooperate and go different directions instead of the direction that we desire them to go in. So it's really critical that we understand how to control our own stress level. And sticking with managing levels of stress, the easiest way to do that is understand pressure patterns. And I like to talk about pressure patterns, and they're really different in various classes of livestock, whether you're handling stocker cattle, whether you're handling cow-calf pairs, or if you're handling herd bulls. But it's all the same. Those pressure patterns, how they respond to pressure, whether they like to move away from you or if they want to turn and fight, it is truly impactful. And honestly, if we have cattle that are in bad health or they're injured, they're more likely to be stressed and more likely to be a little more dangerous. So we have to understand how to add and release pressure when we're handling our livestock. And probably the most important thing that we can do, and it's probably the least likely to happen just because of our busy schedules, but it makes us better managers if we do that. And that is simply pasture interaction throughout the year. It's so critical because if we are within that herd of beef cows, commercial cows, purebred cows, or even stocker cattle without any expectation of them in a movement in any direction, if we're just there present with them, that gives them the opportunity to understand that, yes, we're there, we're present, but we mean no harm. So they become more comfortable with us. We are honestly the more dominant animal, but we don't want that to be a dominance of fear. We want that to be a dominance of respect, so that they know we can just be there and present with them, and they have a certain relaxed or stress-free attitude with our presence. That is so critical to establish. It also makes us better managers because we're able to just watch the cattle in their normal behavior, be it grazing, be it laying in the shade, chewing their cud. We can observe sorefoot readily by just observing. We can observe reproductive events by just being present within the herd. It increases our management ability and also our future profitability by offsetting some negative health patterns or addressing some reproductive issues in a timely manner. Let's go really quick to flight zones and then utilization of those. And we talked about this earlier, understanding pressure zones. Well, the key to controlling movement within any beef cattle herd is understanding pressure and release. So pressure makes cattle move forward, it makes cattle move away, it makes cattle move backward. When we release that pressure, it provides a sense of comfort or a sense of safety to know, that we, the more dominant individual, it has backed away from them. So we just use that pressure and release to control movement. So we utilize imposed force, applying and releasing to affect positive movement while controlling the direction, the speed, and the anxiety within the herd. You know, and I like to talk about lots of times whenever we provide that pressure and release, we have to be as smart or smarter than the cow herd, because we have to know where to position ourselves so that we allow the herd to think they're going in the way that they truly desire to go. And we can do that with simple pressure and release. And the release of pressure, the most important thing that it probably does, it controls the speed of the herd. And if we can keep the cattle at a walking pace, then we can take them anywhere we desire. We could probably take them down the streets of New York City if we can keep a herd of cattle at a walking pace. If they start running, it's very hard to control that herd. But the first thing that we want to do anytime, you know, say we're going to gather the cattle to start an estrus synchronization program. Well, we've got these cattle in a 10-acre pasture or a 50-acre pasture or a 350-acre pasture. The first thing we need to do is be able to assemble those cattle as a herd. They are herd animals. They're the most comfortable within that herd type environment. So before we do anything, when we're out in the pasture, let's assemble them as a herd unit before we start heading them towards the pens. And we talked earlier about, and I think many of you realize, the pivot point on any cow is the shoulder. So when we're in front of the shoulder, that individual cow moves back. When we cross that plane and move behind the shoulder, that animal moves forward. Well, after we've gathered the cattle within a herd, we need to identify that theoretic shoulder point on that entire herd so that we can move them not as 50 individuals, but as one unit, one herd of 50 cows. And that's always present. It's different spots on different cows, but you're going to learn that as you start interacting with your herd more and more. And it varies. If you're a stocker producer, that changes with every group of stockers that you bring into your program, and it's a little bit more difficult. But some movement principles that I like to talk about that we have that help us are 3 points of pressure. The 3 points of pressure principle, if we utilize that, gives us the advantage over the herd in the ability to control that speed that we talked about just a little bit earlier, and the direction with which those cattle move, and also the anxiety level within the herd. So basically, the 3 points of pressure principle apply in a couple different ways. We just need to have 3 areas of control over the cattle that we're working with. And in this slide, I think you can see we have someone on a horse behind pushing, moving those cattle forward. So that's 1 point of pressure. And then we have a fence on each side of those cattle as they move down this lane. So each of these fences is a point of pressure. So hence we have 3 points of pressure. And there's probably nothing that reduces stress more in a beef cow herd than a well-constructed fence. And that's overlooked so often. If we have good fences, the cattle know that they can't get through and they can't jump over. So that exits their mind and they just ignore that. If they know, and in the past have a history of having poor fences and can walk through and go through or jump, that's what they're going to continue to try to do. That's going to increase anxiety in the herd, and they're going to be more erratic in their movement. Now, if you'll notice that one of the 3 points of pressure is fixing to exit once these cattle proceed forward down this lane. That's why this individual has moved up into the opening to take place of the fence as the 3rd point of pressure. So always remember that and think of that when you're handling cattle. Can you move a set of cattle with 3 points of pressure? And it makes it so much easier gathering cattle from the pasture to the corral and maintaining them within that herd unit at a walking pace. And remember, the quickest way to work cattle is as slow as possible. And cattle at a walk are truly easy to control and truly maintain a very, very low level of stress so that whenever we get them to the corral and in the chutes, they're going to be more agreeable to work with. Now, a little bit more on movement patterns and really the ideal movement pattern that we want to incorporate when moving cattle is to have them lined out or strung out. We want to maintain that herd unit, but they move better if they have room to really develop that hierarchy. So in all beef cattle herds, there's a hierarchy within that herd. There's more dominant cattle and there's less dominant cattle. And as you look at this slide, you see that we've got them strung out. So I'm on the horse working these cattle from the side, keeping the front cattle moving forward and the rear cattle moving up. So I'm actually being the 3 points of pressure from behind into the side and allowing the fence to be that third point of pressure. The reason we allow these cattle to string out and not continue to push cattle up from the rear is because the most dominant cattle within any beef cow herd tend to be in the middle, right? Because if there's a grizzly bear, inherently they think of these things. If there's a grizzly bear or a mountain lion somewhere, it's going to get those cattle in the front or it's going to get those cattle in the rear. And those that are in the middle are the safest. So the most dominant cattle tend to wind up in the center portion of that herd. So if we push the less dominant cattle into the more dominant cattle, that's going to cause confusion. That's going to cause maybe a quicker pace or actually turning and trying to go the other way. So always kind of keep that in mind when we're moving cattle. And if they're at a walking pace, they tend to wind up in that strung out fashion that keeps them at a lower level of stress. Probably one of the most critical points and where cattle tend to escape the most and where we as producers receive our highest level of frustration and where we might take that out on somebody helping us are at these critical points. So we've come out of this 60-acre pasture right here with this set of cows, and we've got to that's probably a 12-foot gate, I think. So we've come out of a 50-acre pasture and we're expecting these cows to go through that 12-foot gate with no problem. Well, it's usually no problem if we practice patience and allow those cattle to find their way through, maintain that hierarchy, that dominance level, and go through. But where most producers tend to get excited, they get a little nervous, they get a little anxious, and they start pushing these less dominant cattle into that gate opening a little quicker than they should. And then what happens, these calves turn around and try to escape. The less dominant cows get bumped away by the more dominant cows and they try to exit. So if we can just maintain that level of patience, that level of anxiety within ourselves and give the cattle time to find and maintain their normal pattern out that gate, things tend to work so much better. And that just takes practice in really tempering our anxiety level so that that's also imposing a less stressful situation on the cattle and they can find that exit point much easier and in a more natural fashion. So anytime we've gathered the cattle out of the pasture, now we're moving into a more crowded area, a smaller space, the loading pens, the crowding pens, the holding pens, or the corral. It becomes more critical that we pay attention and we're aware of what we're doing because safety becomes an issue. And one of the most critical things or factors that we need to be aware of is matching the number of cattle to the system or the infrastructure available. And what I mean by that is simply put this way. If this facility that I'm taking, so if the single file alley and the sweet tub or the bud box that I'm taking these cattle to will comfortably fit 5 animals of this stage of production, and these are heifers, I think, going in for one of their first estrus synchronization protocols. If it will hold 5 of these 850-pound to 900-pound heifers, let's just take 4, because it's just like driving down the streets of Nashville or Atlanta or wherever you're at. Our anxiety level tends to go up whenever we hit traffic in congested areas, right? Well, it's the same thing with beef cattle. If they get into a situation where they don't have enough room to maneuver and look and see the opening or the exit out, they're going to try to turn and come back on us. So if 5 will fit, let's take 4 so that we don't have the opportunity for them to become anxious and stressed because there's not enough room. Also like to utilize draws when we're working cattle. And this is a little trick that we do each and every time that we handle our cattle. So if this is another set of cows, a set of 4-year-olds that are going through the estrus synchronization protocol and are actually going in for breeding on this day. But every time we gather cattle that have calves, we go ahead and pull the calves off into a separate pen. One thing that does, that allows these cattle to be more easily drawn every time we come back and to take them to the handling facility. But another thing that does, that in turn, over time, and each time we handle cattle and we remove the calves, it gives them the opportunity to be comfortable and to know that, yes, they can make it, they can survive without their mom, the dam, by their side. So whenever weaning gets here, it actually reduces the level of stress at weaning because they're used to being removed from the mama cow herd. So that really helps. But anytime we can utilize draws to make movement through our handling facility, we need to do that because it simply reduces the anxiety level. Handler position, us as the producer, us as the handler, it's the most critical for us to understand where we need to position ourselves to be the most impactful on cattle movement. And we need to do that with very limited noise and very limited force. And I'll be honest with you, I never use paddles, whips, sticks, or anything like that to encourage movement. I simply utilize my presence placed in the right place. Too often, paddles, whips, and sticks can become weapons if we get stressed and can be misused. Also talking about being advocates for the industry. I'm not saying don't use them if they give you confidence, but there's really very little use in having those to get cattle to move if we're doing it in a low stress type manner. The same thing goes for over vocalization. Cattle tend to get confused with sharp, loud, multiple noises. So just simple talking or a whistle can get cattle to move in the direction that we desire. And ultimately, you know, the result of proper handling is truly safety and effectiveness in whatever we're trying to accomplish. And ultimately, low stress handling is going to imprint or through additive effect, allow your cattle to understand more of what you expect of them. So each time you go through a handling and do it in the proper way, the next time it's going to get easier and easier. So it just gives us the opportunity to enjoy handling our cattle, doing that with family members, and participating in added value programs. And it's something that takes a lot of practice. It's really part of developing that stockmanship mentality. And I think you're really going to enjoy the second portion of this low stress type conversation. And it's going to come more from a genetic perspective and being able to select for traits that help our cattle set up for being less anxious and having less stress. And then it also imparts a positive impact on our ability to manage our cattle. I've truly enjoyed visiting with you today and look forward to visiting with you in person at the Mile and No-Till Field Day.